3 days after my daughter, her husband, and their little girl moved into the house I'd spent 28 years paying off, I overheard him teaching her to smile and say nothing whenever her mother lost her temper. That evening, I gently mentioned it wasn't fair to put that on a 6-year-old. My daughter turned around and told me I was a bitter old man who'd never approved of her marriage. My son-in-law backed her up. Say you're sorry to my wife, or find somewhere else to live. He forgot whose name was on the deed. Welcome, and thank you for sitting with me a while. Tell me in the comments what town you're watching from. I read every one. A quick note before we start. Some names and details in this story have been changed, but what it carries is real enough to matter. I built this house with my own 2 hands, mostly, back when I still had the knees for it. My name is Walter Combs. I'm 71 years old, a retired machinist, and I've lived in a brick rambler on Cedar Hollow Road outside Dayton, Ohio for 34 years. My wife Margaret and I bought the lot when it was nothing but scrub grass and a for sale sign leaning sideways in the wind. We built the house up slow, room by room, the way you build something you intend to keep. Margaret passed 6 years ago this spring. Congestive heart failure, the kind that takes its time and lets you say your goodbyes, which I've since learned is its own strange mercy. People tell me time heals. I've come to think time doesn't heal so much as it teaches you where to set the weight down so it doesn't crush you walking around all day. Some mornings I still make 2 cups of coffee before I catch myself pouring the second one out. The house still smells faintly of the cedar sachets she kept in the linen closet. I haven't replaced them. I don't intend to. For most of those 6 years I lived here by myself. Quiet mornings, the furnace kicking on, birds at the feeder Margaret used to fill every Sunday, which I still fill every Sunday, because some habits are really just love wearing a different coat. Then, 16 months ago, my daughter Denise called. She was 34, married to a man named Craig, mother to my granddaughter Ruby, who'd just turned 6. Denise said they'd hit a rough patch. Craig's contracting business had lost a big client. They were behind on rent. The landlord wasn't budging. She asked if they could stay with me a few months while they got their footing back. I said yes before she'd even finished the sentence. Not for Denise, if I'm honest with myself. For Ruby. That little girl walked through my front door 16 months ago, clutching a one-eared rabbit and reaching up for my hand with the other, and something in my chest that had been quiet a long time just moved. She's got Margaret's eyes. That same steady, curious look, like she's already working out how the world fits together. On a Saturday morning in early spring, I was up before anyone, same as always. I'd made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon and Margaret used to complain about it, and taken my mug out to the back porch to watch the light come up over the tree line. The forsythia along the fence was just starting to go yellow. I heard the screen door creak, then small feet on the boards. Grandpa. Ruby climbed up onto the porch swing next to me without asking, the way kids do when they feel completely safe somewhere. Morning, Peanut. You're up early. I had a dream about Grandma Margaret. She said it with the total seriousness of a 6-year-old delivering breaking news. Something in my chest did something complicated. Did you? She was in a kitchen making cookies. A whole army of cookies. Ruby looked up at me. Was she nice? For real? Not just in the dream? I looked out at the forsythia. She was the kindest person I ever knew, I said. She'd have thought the sun rose and set on you, Ruby girl. Ruby considered that with real gravity, then leaned her small body into my arm, and we sat like that a while, watching a couple of finches squabble over the feeder. I thought about how joy can live in something as small as a kid leaning against your shoulder while the morning takes its time arriving. Grandpa, she said eventually, will you always live here? The question landed somewhere soft. I put my hand on the top of her head. This is my home, Peanut. I'm not going anywhere. She accepted that the way kids accept things when they trust the person saying it completely, and tucked herself in a little closer. Somewhere behind us in the house I heard Craig's truck keys jingle, then Denise moving around the kitchen, the ordinary sounds of a household waking up. I want to be honest here, because when I tell you what happened over the months that followed, I don't want you thinking I hadn't noticed the tension building under that roof already. 16 months of shared space wears at the edges of things. There'd been friction I couldn't quite name, nothing I could point to, just a feeling, like a house going quiet before a storm, even when the sky's still clear. But that morning, with Ruby warm against my side and the finches carrying on, it still felt like a good one. I didn't know yet it would be one of the last easy mornings I'd get for a long while. 4 days later, I was heading down the hallway to grab a sweater from the hall closet, a Tuesday afternoon. Craig out on a job site, Denise running errands, the house sitting in that particular stillness it gets when the light slants low through the west windows. I was maybe 6 feet from Ruby's door, which was open just a crack, when I heard Craig's voice inside. Low, even, patient, almost the way you'd explain the rules of a board game. Ruby, look at me. You listening? Yes, Daddy. Good. Now here's the thing. If Mommy gets upset, if she starts yelling, doesn't matter why. You don't argue back. You don't cry. You just smile and nod and wait for it to pass. You understand? A pause. But what if she's yelling because of something I did? Doesn't matter. Smiling and nodding is what keeps everybody calm, baby. You want to keep everybody calm, don't you? Yes. That's my girl. Can you practice your calm face for me? I stood there in the hallway with my hand flat against the wall, and I did not move. There was a pause. Then Craig's voice again. Warmer. Perfect. That's exactly right. My stomach turned over slow, like something heavy rolling in deep water. I kept waiting for it to resolve into something less than what it sounded like. A joke, a game, anything. It didn't. What I'd overheard wasn't a parent venting in a tired moment. It was instruction. Rehearsed. Approved of when performed correctly. And Ruby, my Ruby, with Margaret's eyes and her one-eared rabbit, was learning it. I didn't say anything that day. I told myself I'd bring it up calmly that evening, once Ruby was down, the way I'd handled every hard conversation across 40 years on a factory floor and in a marriage. Measured. Give people the benefit of the doubt until they prove you wrong. I had no idea yet how badly I'd misjudged the size of what I was dealing with. I waited until the house went quiet the way it does after a kid falls asleep, that particular hush when the running feet stop and the questions stop. I found Denise in the living room, feet tucked under her on the couch, phone in hand. Denise, you got a minute? She looked up. Something flickered across her face before it smoothed back to neutral. Sure, Dad. I sat down across from her, kept my voice easy. I was in the hall this afternoon and I overheard part of a conversation Craig was having with Ruby about staying calm when your mom gets upset. I don't think that's... I didn't ask for your opinion. Her voice came out flat. Flat the way a road is flat, right before a drop-off. I know you didn't. But I live here, and Ruby's my granddaughter, and what happens to her matters to me. She unfolded herself off the couch, stood, and her voice climbed a notch. You've never liked Craig. You've never once given him a real chance, and now you're going to stand in my living room and tell me how to raise my kid? That's not what I said. You retired, she said, and her eyes had gone very still. You sit in this house with nothing to do all day but watch what everybody else is doing and decide you know better. You're a bitter old man, and you need to mind your own business. The words landed the way words like that always land, less about the sting and more about the shock of hearing them out loud. In the room where Margaret used to fold laundry while Denise did her homework at that same coffee table. The front door opened. Craig stepped in, stopped when he felt the temperature of the room. His eyes moved from Denise to me, and back. Denise's whole posture changed in an instant, shoulders dropping, chin trembling. Your father just called me a bad mother, she said, voice gone small and bruised. That is not what I said. My own voice came out tighter than I wanted. Craig's jaw set. The exact expression I'd watched him wear the handful of times he'd already made his mind up about something and didn't want to be talked out of it. What did you say to her? I overheard something with Ruby that concerned me, and I raised it. That's all. He's been doing this since we moved in, Denise said. Every look, every little comment. Craig looked at her, the shimmer in her eyes, the way she was holding herself, and I watched him make his choice in real time. That precise moment a person decides what they're going to believe and shuts the door on everything else. Walter, he said, apologize to my wife. Craig, I haven't said anything that requires an apology. Apologize. His voice hardened. Or, find somewhere else to stay. The room went very still. I looked at this man who'd sat at my table for 16 months, eaten food I'd paid for, slept under a roof I'd built with my own hands, and I felt something in my chest go quiet in a way that wasn't calm at all. Did you just tell the man who owns this house, I said slowly, to leave it? Craig didn't flinch. Yes. I looked at Denise. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not triumphant, exactly, but close. The look of someone who's played a card and is waiting to see how the table responds. All right, I said. I turned and walked down the hall to my room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door. I closed it soft, the way Margaret always said you close a door when you're truly angry, so the click of the latch is the loudest thing in the room. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and let myself feel the whole weight of it. The anger. The grief underneath the anger. The exhaustion of being in a fight I never asked for, in a house I'd paid off with 28 years of second shifts. Then I took a breath, and I started thinking. The 2 weeks that followed were a masterclass in what I can only call armed politeness. Good morning in the kitchen. Good night in the hall. Smiles at Ruby every chance I got. Pretending for her sake nothing had shifted. If you'd walked through that front door as a stranger, you'd have thought we were a quiet family living a quiet life. You'd have been wrong. It was a Saturday when Craig headed out early for a job site walkthrough, his truck rattling out of the driveway before 8. The house felt looser with him gone. The way a room feels once someone who's been holding their breath finally leaves it. I was in the living room in Margaret's armchair with my coffee and the paper. Same as 10,000 Saturdays before. On the mantel across from me sat Margaret's music box, a little cedar thing with a hand-painted robin on the lid, something her own mother had given her, older than our marriage. It had sat on that mantel for 34 years, through 2 roof replacements and 1 flood in the basement that took nearly everything else in the house with it. That music box had never so much as gathered dust without me noticing. Ruby came tearing down the hallway in her socks, arms out for balance the way 6-year-olds run everywhere, full tilt. She clipped the corner of the bookshelf, and the music box rocked once, twice, and went over the edge. I was out of the chair before I decided to move. Wasn't fast enough. It hit the hardwood, and the lid cracked clean off. The little painted robin split down the middle. Ruby froze in the middle of the room, eyes huge, chest heaving. She looked at the pieces, then up at me, lower lip starting to tremble, the real kind of fear, not a performed one. Grandpa, I didn't mean... I crouched down to her level, kept my voice as soft as I could manage with my heart somewhere up in my throat. I know you didn't, Peanut. It was an accident. You hurt anywhere? What happened? Denise's voice, from the kitchen doorway. She took in the scene, the broken box, Ruby's face, me crouched on the floor with an efficiency that chilled me straight through. Then she looked at Ruby, and something passed between them. Quick, deliberate. Tell Grandpa it's his fault for leaving it where you could reach it, Denise said, calm as anything. Ruby's face changed. The trembling lip, the genuine fright it flickered, and I watched the exact moment she chose the line she'd been taught to choose. Grandpa, she said, voice gone small and strange. It's your fault. Those words hit somewhere I didn't have a name for. Not because a kid had said it, because it was Ruby. Because 20 minutes earlier she'd been sprinting toward the living room with her whole body full of nothing but a Saturday morning. And now she was standing 4 feet away reciting a line somebody had handed her. I didn't argue. Didn't look at Denise. I knelt on the hardwood and started gathering the pieces one at a time. Careful. The way you handle something that deserves care even after it's already broken. Come on, baby. Let's get breakfast going, Denise said behind me, bright and unbothered, like she'd just settled a minor scheduling conflict. Ruby's footsteps followed her out. I gathered every fragment into my cupped hands, carried them to my room, and found an old cigar box in my closet. I folded the lid shut and set it on the shelf above my desk. I couldn't have told you exactly why I kept them. I'm not a sentimental man by nature, but something in me the same. Something that had guided 40 years of reading machines for wear before they failed outright knew I was going to need to remember exactly how this felt. After that Saturday, I started watching Craig the way you watch a piece of equipment you suspect has a flaw in it somewhere. Not the way a father-in-law watches with hope layered over everything. The way an engineer reads a structure. What I found wasn't easy to sit with. It was a Tuesday evening when Craig came home looking the way he'd been looking a lot of evenings lately, shoulders up around his ears, jaw tight. He dropped his bag by the door and came into the kitchen where I was finishing coffee at the table. Rough one? He stared into the open fridge without taking anything out. Client walked on the Miller job, said our numbers were wrong. He shut the fridge. They weren't wrong. Foreman gave them bad measurements and didn't own it. Did you tell them that? He looked at me like I'd asked why water was wet. That's not how it works, Walter. Seems like it's exactly how it should work. Yeah, well. He sat down heavy across from me. Some of us don't have the luxury of being right and unemployed. I looked at my son-in-law, 36 years old, not without decency somewhere in him. A man I'd tried, genuinely, to give a fair shake and felt something ache behind my sternum that wasn't anger. Something quieter and more complicated. There's a difference, I said carefully, between picking your battles and never fighting one. Something tightened around his eyes. Not in the mood for a lecture, Walter. All. Wasn't one. Observation. But. He stood up, and just then Denise came through from the hallway, glanced at the counter, frowned. Craig, did somebody move my spice rack? Craig turned, looked at the counter, looked at me. Walter, did you move Denise's spice rack? I felt the whiplash of it, the speed with which whatever he'd been carrying all day found a new, safer place to land. I wiped the counter down this morning. Set it back where it was. It's not where it was, Denise said, not looking at me. It's 4 inches off, Craig. She put a hand on his arm, a gesture that looked like comfort and worked like a signal. Craig straightened. Walter, just be mindful of her things, all right? I looked at this man who, 20 minutes earlier, had told me he was too scared to correct his own boss over a plain fact, and who was now standing 4 feet from me with his chest out, correcting me over a spice rack. The shape of it was so clear it nearly hurt to look at. I rinsed my mug, set it exactly where it had been. Of course. Good night. By the middle of that spring, Denise had stopped arguing with me altogether. I thought at first that meant things were settling. I understand now, I was wrong. What she replaced arguments with was something more surgical, no confrontations, no raised voices, just a slow, deliberate rearranging of the household until I became peripheral to my own life inside it. It started with breakfast. For 16 months, mornings had a rhythm. Ruby would come down, find whoever was up, and attach herself with the single-minded devotion of a 6-year-old. Most mornings, that was me. We'd sit and she'd tell me about whatever animal she'd learned about that week, or ask me to explain, for the 10th time, why the moon changed shape. Those mornings were the reason I got out of bed. The first time Denise redirected her, I thought nothing of it. Come eat with Mommy, sweet pea. I made your eggs the way you like them. Ruby glanced at me, uncertain, then slid off her chair. The second time, I noticed. The third, I understood. After that, the pattern held with a consistency that could only be intentional. Whenever Ruby drifted my way, there was suddenly an errand, a show she had to watch right now, a snack waiting in the other room. One evening, Ruby paused in the living room doorway on her way to find me, face lit up with something she wanted to show me, and Denise said, from the kitchen, "Grandpa's tired, baby. Don't bother him." Ruby's face dimmed like a light flickering. "But I wanted to show him my drawing." "You can show him tomorrow." She turned and went upstairs. I stood around the corner of the hall, out of sight, and felt something in my chest wind tight, like a rope pulled around something it wasn't meant to bind. I started keeping a notebook. A plain spiral thing I'd used for grocery lists for years. In late spring, I began using it differently: the date, the exact words when I could remember them, the pattern laid out plain the way you'd lay out a wiring diagram. I'd spent 40 years reading systems for the small failures that predict the big ones. A pattern isn't nothing. A pattern is a blueprint. There are small mercies in hard seasons, and mine came by phone on a Thursday afternoon in early June. I was in the backyard resetting a fence post that had worked loose over the winter, the kind of work that clears a man's head the way almost nothing else does, when I heard the screen door and small sneakers on the patio. Stones. Grandpa. Ruby crossed the yard, hands in her jacket pockets, studying the fence post with the seriousness of a tiny consultant. "Why's it broken?" "Not broken," I said. "Leaning. There's a difference. Broken means it's done. Leaning just means somebody needs to correct it." She thought about that, satisfied, and settled cross-legged in the grass to hand me tools. After a while, out of nowhere, "Grandpa, how come you don't eat breakfast with us anymore?" My hammer stilled. Grown-ups have different schedules sometimes. Peanut. "You used to, though." Not accusing, just stating a fact the way kids do when adults have learned to dance around it. "I know. Things change sometimes. Doesn't mean I love you any less." She picked up a stray screw, turned it over in her fingers. "Grandpa, do you like living here with us?" The question caught me somewhere unguarded. "I love this house," I said carefully. "Your grandmother and I built it together, and I love having you in it. That part I wouldn't trade for anything." She was quiet a moment, setting the screw down very precisely, like returning something borrowed. "Mommy says you're a bitter old man." Sal. The words dropped into the space between us. I kept both hands on the fence post and breathed once, Then again, while the afternoon went on around us, indifferent. She hadn't said it cruel. That was what made it so much harder to absorb. She'd said it the way she'd report the weather. Information passed along with no idea of the weight it carried. You think that, Peanut? She furrowed her brow, working through it honestly. I don't know. Mommy says so. The back door opened. Ruby, inside, wash up for dinner. She scrambled up, brushed grass off her knees, looked back at me. Something moved across her face. Not guilt. Something younger than guilt, then ran for the door. I sat back on my heels in the grass and pressed a hand flat against the earth like I needed something solid to push against. Bitter old man. The exact words Denise had thrown at me in the living room, now traveling through the mouth of the person I loved most in the world, delivered without any malice at all, which somehow made it worse. The following week my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Ruby's elementary school. Mr. Combs, this is Patricia Alvarez, Ruby's teacher. I wasn't able to reach Denise or Craig this morning, and your name's listed as her emergency contact. Do you have a few minutes? She explained it carefully, the way a good teacher lays things out in sequence without editorializing more than necessary. Twice in the last 3 weeks, Ruby had been involved in incidents, a knocked-over supply bin, a missing eraser from another kid's desk, and both times, when asked what happened, Ruby had immediately pointed at a classmate and begun crying before anyone had pressed her further. I want to be careful here, Miss Alvarez said. I'm not suggesting anything beyond what I'm observing, but it's a pattern, and I think it's worth a conversation with the family before it becomes more established. A pause. There's one more thing. During free time last week, Ruby mentioned, very matter of fact, that at home she just smiles and stays quiet no matter what, because that's what keeps everyone calm. I asked her what she meant. She said, Daddy taught me. It's my job to keep Mommy from getting madder. The kitchen went very quiet around me. I'm not drawing conclusions, Mr. Combs. I just felt you should know. I'm glad you told me, I said, my voice steadier than my hand, which had curled itself into a fist on the table without my noticing. I told her I'd make sure Ruby's parents called her back that day. When I mentioned the call to Denise later, she took the note with the number, folded it once, and put it in her pocket without a word. Nobody ever mentioned it again. That silence told me more than any explanation could have. 2 weeks after that, Miss Alvarez called again, this time asking for me first. I know that's irregular, she said, but given the circumstances, I felt you were the right person. She told me Ruby had let something slip during a one-on-one chat, something that had clearly surprised even Ruby to hear herself say that her mommy had told her. If a teacher asked about home, to say she didn't remember anything. Then Ruby had covered her mouth, like she'd said something she wasn't supposed to. 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, Miss Alvarez corrected herself gently, aren't natural secret keepers, Mr. Combs. I wanted you to know before anything else. I thanked her more than I could easily say. On the drive home I understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that I was no longer the only person paying attention. 3 weeks later I came home from an afternoon at my neighbor Hal's. We'd played cribbage and argued about the Reds' bullpen for 3 hours. The kind of afternoon that restores a man even when nothing particular gets said to find the living room holding its breath. Craig stood in the middle of it, arms crossed, jaw set in that configuration I'd come to recognize as the face he wore once Denise had already told him her version and he'd swallowed it whole. On the coffee table lay the pieces of Margaret's kitchen clock, the one she'd bought at a flea market in '89. Round face, hand-painted rooster, the thing that had ticked through every meal in that house for 3 decades. Dad, Denise's voice was tight. Did you take this down this morning? I looked at the pieces. I looked at my daughter. I haven't touched that clock in months. I was at Hal's since noon. Denise stepped out from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, slow and deliberate. It was fine when I walked past it at 8, Dad. I wasn't in this house, I said, keeping my voice level though my hands had curled at my sides. I did not touch your mother's clock. Craig looked at Denise. Something passed between them. Quick, nearly invisible. He looked back at me, jaw loosening into something almost like regret, though not quite. Walter, if you knocked it down by accident. I did not knock it down. He pressed his lips together, looked at the table, looked at Denise, and chose the easier road. Okay, we'll get it fixed. Just be careful with Mom's stuff. Denise nodded gravely, like this settled something reasonable, and went back to the kitchen. I stood there 3 full seconds looking at the pieces of Margaret's clock on my own coffee table in my own house. Then I went and got a glass of water and drank it at the sink, and made myself think. 2 months earlier, after somebody had lifted a package off the porch, Craig had mounted a little security camera in the corner of the living room, angled at the front door, mostly to catch porch thieves. We'd all half forgotten it was even there. I did not go check that footage that evening. I am not an impulsive man. But I went to my room, opened the notebook, wrote the date, wrote Margaret's clock, damage inconsistent with a fall. Craig chose not to investigate, and beneath it, underlined twice, check the camera. The following week, my old union buddy Ray called me out of nowhere. You seen what Denise put on Facebook? You know I don't do Facebook, Ray. I know. That's why I'm calling. He read it to me, something about toxic energy and finally free of people who think they still run things and praying for peace under my own roof. 40-some likes. A handful of comments from people who used to know me at the plant, worried, asking if she was okay. Her profile's public, Walter. Anybody can see it. I stood in the kitchen a long moment after we hung up, looking out at Margaret's peonies coming up along the fence. Thank you for telling me, Ray, I said. Don't say anything back to her, though. That's exactly what she'd want. That night I sat at the kitchen table and thought it through, not as a father hurting but as a man used to reading a problem before it reads him. Denise had taken this outside the house, built herself an audience where I had no voice at all. She'd kept it vague enough that nothing could be challenged directly. She was, I had to admit, more calculating than I'd given her credit for. I called an old friend from the plant floor, Bill Osei, who'd gone into property law 20 years back after his knees gave out on the line, same as mine nearly had. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. He picked up on the second ring like no time had passed at all, and when I told him I needed to talk something through, he said, "Come by Thursday, 2 o'clock." By the second week of June, I understood something important about Denise. She wasn't a patient strategist. She was reactive. Every move, the public dressing down, the isolation, the Facebook post, the broken clock, was a response to my refusal to disappear quietly. And every time one tactic failed to move me, she pivoted, fast, without much reflection. Her next pivot, I noticed a few days later, was that she wanted a reaction from me, and she wanted it on camera. She started leaving her phone propped at odd angles against the fruit bowl. On the windowsill in the hall, the lens pointed toward wherever I usually stood. I was an old machinist. I understood angles and I understood intent. I started making my afternoon tea in the little half bath off my room instead, with a kettle I kept for exactly that kind of evening. At the dinner table one night, with all 4 of us seated for once, Denise said loud enough to fill the room, "Dad, do you have to breathe like that at the table?" Craig's fork paused midair. Ruby looked up, bright and alert, sensing something was about to happen. I set my napkin down, said "excuse me," pleasantly, and carried my plate to the kitchen. I sat in my room afterward and did my breathing count 4 in, 4 out, the way my cardiologist had shown me 2 years back, and then I opened the notebook and wrote it down. Date, time, exact words, who was present. Ruby, caught in the middle of it, started doing something that broke my heart, quietly watching the room before she moved. I noticed it one Saturday. She came downstairs, looked toward me, looked toward the kitchen where Denise was, and visibly calculated which direction was safer before climbing up on the couch beside me. "Can we watch the one about wolves?" she asked. "The nature documentary we used to watch together, before all this." "Sure thing," I said, reaching for the remote. From the kitchen, "Ruby, come help me with something." She looked at the TV, looked at me, looked at her mother, and slid off the couch with the resigned compliance of a kid whose learned resistance costs more than it's worth. "Okay, Mommy," she said quietly. I sat there with the remote in my hand, and felt the anger rise in me clean and sharp, and then I felt it pass, the way I'd been training it to pass, because I understood now that anger was the one thing I couldn't afford to give her. Anger was the footage she wanted. What she couldn't film, couldn't post, couldn't caption, for 40 sympathetic strangers, was patience. She couldn't weaponize a man who wouldn't perform. That Friday, when Craig mentioned they were taking Ruby to a birthday party across town, back by 9, I noted it the way I noted everything now, carefully, with intention. By 7:30 that evening, the house was mine in a way it hadn't been in 16 months. I poured a glass of water, carried it to my room, and opened my laptop. The security app was still installed on my phone from when Craig had shown me, back in February, walking me through it with the patient, slightly performative helpfulness of a son-in-law demonstrating something to the old man. I hadn't opened it since. I opened it now. I found the Saturday the music box broke and scrolled to the footage from before, and there was nothing suspicious there. That one truly had been Ruby's accident. And some small mercy in me was glad of it. But I kept going. Into the weeks after. And I found the morning of the clock. Denise, alone in the frame, walking to the mantel, standing in front of it a long moment, head tilted the way you tilt your head, weighing a decision. Then lifting the clock down herself, prying the back open, twisting the face sharp in both hands until the crack showed clean across the glass, setting it back exactly where it had sat, straightening a cushion on her way out, like she'd only come in to tidy up. I sat back and pressed both palms against my eyes and held them there, something adjacent to crying that couldn't find its way all the way out, because I was 71 years old and had spent 40 years being trained to answer feeling with thinking. I kept watching. An hour and 40 minutes of footage, Denise redirecting Ruby away from me on 4 separate evenings, each time with a smoothness that told me it had been rehearsed. A fragment of audio, low and clear enough in a quiet moment. If he says anything to you about me, you tell him it's not his business. Just like we practiced. And Ruby's small voice. Okay, Mommy. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady. I checked, pressing them flat on the desk, steady. I opened the drawer, took out an old external hard drive I'd bought years back for tax records, and spent the next 22 minutes exporting every clip, timestamps intact, to 2 separate places neither Denise nor Craig could ever reach. Then I made chamomile tea, the way Margaret used to on nights her own mind wouldn't slow, and sat in her armchair, and read for 90 minutes until I heard the truck in the driveway. I dog-eared my page, and went to bed knowing exactly what came next. If not yet, exactly when. The following Wednesday I put on the gray sport coat Margaret had picked out for me in '99, said it made me look like a man worth listening to, and drove downtown to see Bill O'Say. His office was on the 9th floor of a renovated building on Main Street, all clean lines and the kind of quiet that means everyone inside is busy and good at their job. He met me at the door himself, grip still firm at nearly 70, hair gone fully white since I'd last seen him. "Walter, sit, tell me." I told him everything. The notebook on my knee, though I didn't need to open it. I'd written it down enough times it lived in me now, ordered as a wiring diagram, the hallway conversation. Craig's ultimatum, the months of quiet redirection. The school calls, the clock, the Facebook post, the footage. He listened without interrupting, the way a man listens when the information actually matters. When I finished, he picked up his coffee, set it back down. Walked me through the ownership. Bought the lot in '91. Sole owner. Margaret was on the deed until she passed, full ownership reverted to me. Never added Denise's name. No mortgage. Paid off outright. And Denise and Craig moved in when? 16 months ago. No lease. No rent agreement, written or spoken. I invited them while they got back on their feet. So they're licensees, Bill said. And his voice shifted into that register lawyers use for a term that's about to matter a great deal. Not tenants. That's an important distinction, Walter, and it works entirely in your favor. A tenant's got contractual protections you'd need formal eviction proceedings, and that takes months and requires cause you'd have to prove. A licensee occupies with your permission and no formal agreement. That permission can be revoked. Ohio requires 30 days written notice for a licensee who's been there over a year. Clear, dated, delivered, in a way you can document. After 30 days, if they haven't gone, you've got legal grounds to move further. My chest loosened, just slightly. And the footage? Ohio's a one-party consent state for recording. In a residence you own, footage from a common area is entirely legal, and it'd be admissible if this ever went further, especially, he said, watching me carefully, if it comes anywhere near a custody question involving Ruby. The words custody question sat heavy in the room. Bill, I need you to understand something. I'm not trying to punish Denise or take Ruby away from her mother. I want Ruby safe, and I want to still be in her life. That's the whole of it. His face softened. Understood. Ohio law lets grandparents petition for visitation if you can show the relationship's established and being interfered with. Given what you've described, the documented isolation, the school reports, the footage, you'd have real standing, if it ever came to that. I hope it doesn't. So do I. He made a note, then looked up. You mentioned wanting to protect something that belongs to Ruby, not to her parents. Talk to me. I told him about the trust I'd been turning over for 2 weeks. Irrevocable. Ruby as sole beneficiary. A trustee, independent of both Denise and Craig. education, medical, and a provision for young adulthood. You've thought this through, Bill said. And something in his expression shifted towards something more personal. I was a machinist for 40 years, I said. I don't start a job till I know exactly what I'm building. An irrevocable trust in Ohio means exactly what it sounds like. Once it's funded, you can't undo it. Not if your relationship with Denise changes. Not for any reason. You're certain? I thought of Ruby in the backyard handing me tools, asking if the fence could be corrected, saying without knowing what it cost me, "Mommy says you're a bitter old man." "I'm certain," I said. He nodded once, the way he used to nod on the line when a weld held clean the first time. "Then let's build it properly." We spent 2 more hours on the framework. When I stood to go, he shook my hand at the door and held it a beat longer than business required. "I've known you 30 years, Walter. Whatever this has cost you, you're doing right by that little girl." My throat tightened more than I expected. I thanked him and rode the elevator down alone. In the lobby, I called my bank to set an appointment with the trust officer for Monday, then called a financial planner named Carol Ferris. I'd worked with 15 years back before she'd scaled down to a small practice out of a converted farmhouse in Bellbrook. She remembered me right away and said Thursday would work fine. Carol's office looked more like a well-kept library than a place of business. Bookshelves floor to ceiling, a garden visible out the window behind her desk. She listened the way Bill had, hands folded, glasses pushed up on her head, and when I finished, she was quiet a moment, organizing. "Irrevocable," she said. "I want to make sure you understand it, not the legal definition, what it means for you, personally. Once those assets move into that trust, they're not yours anymore. Not if things change with Denise. Not for any reason at all. I understand. You're 71, healthy as far as you know." "As far as I know is accurate," I said, and she almost smiled. We spent 2 hours building it out, piece by piece, education from kindergarten through whatever she chose to pursue, indexed for inflation. A medical provision available immediately, if ever needed. A young adulthood allocation released at 25, contingent on Ruby presenting some basic plan for its use. "That last piece is unusual," Carol said. Penn paused. "Margaret's idea? Or it would have been. She always said money handed over without any expectation attached. Just produces people without direction. She sounds like she was very practical. Most practical person I ever knew," I said. "And the kindest." Those two things were never in conflict. With her. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday evening at the end of July, I sat at my desk with the finished documents in front of me. Bill had reviewed them. Carol had reviewed them. The bank had the transfer paperwork ready. All that was left was my signature. I thought about Denise, the girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms, who'd once decked a boy twice her size at recess for calling her little brother names before he existed, who held my hand at Margaret's funeral and hadn't let go for the longest time. I thought about the distance between who she'd been and who she'd become, and whether it was a distance a person could still cross back over. Then I thought of Ruby's small, warm hand on the fence post, and the question on the porch swing in March, "Will you always live here?" And I signed my name slow and legible, the way I sign everything that matters. I set the pen down and looked at Margaret's photo on the corner of the desk, the two of us on the shore at Put-in Bay in '88, her laughing at something I'd said, unguarded and completely happy. "I'm doing what I can," I told the photograph, quiet. "Rest is up to him." I dropped the sealed envelope at Bill's office Friday morning. That evening I sat in the living room reading while Craig watched a ball game across from me, low volume, and if you'd walked in off the street you might have thought two men sharing an ordinary quiet evening. You'd have been wrong about ordinary, right about the quiet. Ruby came down eventually in her pajamas, yellow ones with little foxes on them, getting short in the leg, refused to give them up, hair damp from the bath, rabbit tucked under one arm. "Good night, Grandpa." She leaned against my chair a few seconds, and I put my hand on her damp hair. "Sleep well, Peanut. I'm gonna dream about the wolves again." "Good choice." She grinned, wide and entirely her own, and padded back up the stairs. I looked down at my book and the words had gone blurry. I pressed 2 fingers to the corner of my eye and turned the page without reading it. 20 minutes later, Craig set down his phone. "You know, Walter, if you just apologized to Denise, things could go back to normal." I looked at him a long moment. "What would go back to normal, Craig?" He didn't answer. Changed the channel. Changed it back. I gave him the space to say something real. He didn't take it. "Good night, son," I said, and went to my room, and read every page of the notebook, front to back. March through July, every date, every word. And when I closed it, I pressed my hand flat on the cover and thought, 7 in the morning, one phone call. At 7 the next morning I was at the kitchen table with coffee going lukewarm in my hands. I made the call. Bill picked up on the second ring. Today, I said. I'll be there at 10. Locksmith's already lined up for 10:30. At 8:30, when the household started stirring, I did something I hadn't done in 4 months. I sat down at the family table. Denise came in first, stopped when she saw me, hands still on the doorframe, running the calculation she always ran when something shifted outside her expectations. Then she recovered, moved to start the coffee maker. Back to me. Ruby came down 30 seconds later, rubbing one eye. Grandpa, are you eating with us? Just this morning, Peanut. She climbed into the chair beside me, and the solid, warm weight of her settling in made something in my chest pull tight enough I had to breathe through it careful. At 10, the doorbell rang. Craig answered it and found Bill on the porch in a charcoal suit, briefcase in hand, looking exactly like a property attorney who'd been doing this 40 years and long since stopped finding it uncomfortable. Morning, Craig. Is Walter around? See. Craig's face ran through confusion, recognition, and something dangerously close to understanding, all in about 2 seconds. He stepped back without a word, and I came forward. We sat in the living room. Denise appeared from the kitchen, dish towel in hand, eyes moving from Bill to me, to the papers coming out of the briefcase. The color went out of her face. What is this? Bill read the notice clear and unhurried. Walter Combs, sole owner of the property, was exercising his right to revoke the residential license extended to Denise and Craig. 30 days written notice, as Ohio law required, given the length of occupancy. Effective vacancy date, the last day of August. The room went rigid. Denise's voice, when it came, shook with a fury she wasn't managing well. You can't do this. This is insane. We live here. As licensees rather than tenants. Bill said, calm as a man reading weather. You don't carry the same protections under Ohio landlord-tenant law. Mr. Combs has followed proper procedure. Craig, say something. Denise wheeled on him. Craig looked at me for the first time since March without Denise's version of things standing between us, and what I saw wasn't anger. It was a man who'd just felt the floor drop and was trying to work out which way was down. Walter, what is this? This is my home, Craig, I said quietly. You told the man who owns it to leave. I chose not to. I excused myself, walked to the back door, found Ruby standing uncertain in the hall, drawn by the noise. Hey, Peanut, come check on Grandma's peonies with me. She took my hand without a question, and we went out into the yard together while the locksmith worked inside. We stood among the flowers, and she asked why some of them hadn't opened yet, and I told her some things just take longer to be ready, and that didn't make them any less worth waiting for. They were gone by the 1st of September. I watched Craig's truck pull out of the driveway that last time from the living room window, bed loaded with boxes, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief, not satisfaction. Grief. Clean, uncomplicated grief for the version of all this that should have existed and never did. 6 weeks later, on a gray evening in October, Denise called. He left, she said. No preamble. Craig said he never really wanted any of this. The marriage, none of it. Said he'd been unhappy since maybe year 2. Her voice cracked. Dad, was I always this hard to love, or did I do something? Denise, I kept my voice steady. I think you both made choices that led you here. That's not the same as it being your fault. It just means you've got some say in where you go from here. She was quiet a long moment. I'm sorry, Dad. For all of it. Those words landed somewhere in me that had been waiting 7 months to hear them. I know, I said. I know. In November, she came by on a Saturday morning, and we sat at the kitchen table with coffee the way we used to. Not the same as it used to be, but something. She'd heard through Bill's office about the trust. It goes to Ruby now, she said. Not quite a question. When she's old enough to use it. Because you don't trust me. I looked at my daughter Margaret's chin, the tired lines around her eyes that were newer than they should have been, and underneath the tired, something that might, if she chose it, still become something else. Because I don't trust the version of yourself you've been living inside, I said. I hope that changes. I mean that. Her throat moved. Can I keep coming back? The door's open, I said. Always was. December came in cold, the way it does in Ohio, straight into the bones of an old house. I was in the backyard wrapping the last of Margaret's roses in burlap when I heard footsteps on the walk and turned to find Ruby running toward me in a coat 2 sizes too big, sneakers soaked through, face wet with something that wasn't the light rain falling. She crashed into me full speed, and I went down to both knees on the wet grass and got my arms around her, and she was crying, not the coached kind, the real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere held too long. "Mommy said I have to be mad at you," she said between breaths. "But I'm not, Grandpa. I'm not mad." My eyes burned so fierce I had to close them. "Hey, I've got you. I've got you. Slash pass. I've got you." She pulled back eventually, looked up at me with her swollen eyes. "Are you mad at me?" "Never," I said. "Not for one single second." She searched my face the way kids search for the truth when they've learned they don't always get it, and something in her settled. She leaned back into me, and I held my granddaughter in the December rain in the garden her grandmother had planted, and understood finally, completely, what all of it had been for. Not the house, not the trust, not the notice or the attorney or the 30 days. This girl, this moment, the certainty, without anyone ever having to explain it to her, that there was one place in this world where she was always safe, always wanted, always entirely herself. Looking back now, I think about those 9 months, the notebook, the isolation, the broken clock, the footage, the documents, and I keep arriving at the same place. I wasn't a perfect father to Denise. There were things I should have said to her years before any of this, conversations I let slide because peace felt easier than the truth. If I could go back, I wouldn't wait so long. I'd say the hard things sooner, with more love and less patience for the silence that lets a thing like this take root. Don't wait until the house is already on fire to decide what you're willing to protect. What I've learned at 71, in this season, is that dignity isn't something anyone else can grant you. It's something you either hold on to or you let go of. And the moment you let go, not for pride's sake, but for the sake of whoever's watching you do it, that's the moment everything starts to come apart. I believe in family justice. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that shows up on a Saturday morning with a briefcase and 30 days written notice. If this story found something in you, if you've lived a version of it, or you love someone who has, tell me about it in the comments. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it today. And if you believe family justice is worth the wait it sometimes takes, stay with this channel, because there's more where this came from. Thank you for staying to the end. It means more than you'd think.